Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Senator Brown and myself, welcome to today's hearing. I don't know. I was just saying to Senator Brown that we may be the only hearing in the Senate today. I don't know, but the others are dropping like flies. But you got when you see the two of us here, you know we're serious about saving some money, and we are for our country. But we're glad that our witnesses could be here, and today, and all our guests as well. But today we're going to examine the challenges that our federal government faces managing its real property, and in particular its reliance on space that's leased from the private sector to satisfy long-term real estate needs. I just addressed a group over in the House side a little while ago, Scott, and they come from the accounting industry, the auditing industry, and actually do a whole lot of work as a firm to support the GAO's efforts with respect to high-risk list, high risk for using a lot of money, taxpayer money. But we have had a number of hearings here in the past about real estate, high risk, and we have literally thousands of pieces of property sitting around us, thousands of pieces of property that the federal government owns that we pay utilities for, maintenance for, security for, that we ought to get rid of. We don't use them. And we also find out that there's something else that we're spending a lot of money for, and the GAO has been reminding us of this for a couple of years, and that is we have a lot of agencies that lease space for years, in some cases for decades, and we'd save a lot of money. They'd save a lot of money if instead of leasing, we'd actually buy the stuff. And there's a lot of instances where it actually makes a lot of sense to lease, like the Department of the Census Office. Every 10 years you do a census. Doesn't make sense to to buy all those pieces of property they're going to use once every 10 years. But that's a little bit of background here. But there's a general consensus that our federal government has to get smarter about the ways we manage our buildings and land. Presidents in both parties now have made doing so a top management priority. And with concerns over the implication of our deficit or national debt mounting, eliminating waste, achieving cost savings in this area remains a top priority for us, and I hope for the rest of our colleagues in the House and the Senate and the administration. Between 2001 and 2009, we ran up as much debt, as you know, as we did in the first 208 years of our nation's history. Last year, we ran up what may be the largest budget deficit in our nation's history. With most of us here in Washington, while most of us here in Washington are united in our desire to find a solution to our nation's fiscal problems, we're still facing an ocean of red ink as far as the eye can see, even after enactment earlier this week of the spending cuts included in the legislation to raise our country's debt ceiling. A wide variety of ideas have been put forward on how to reduce our budget deficit and begin whittling down our debt. Last fall, a majority of the Bipartisan Deficit Commission appointed by President Clinton, co-chaired by Alan Simpson, former Republican senator from Wyoming, and by Erskine Bowles, former chief of staff to then President Bill Clinton. They provided us, along with their colleagues on the Deficit Commission, a roadmap to reduce cumulative federal deficits over the next decade by some $4 trillion. And at the same time getting reform of our entitlement programs, tax reform, pretty comprehensive approach, bipartisan, comprehensive, and it would actually not be just a deal. It would actually been a solution to the challenge that we face. And their work is reinforced by the gang of 6, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and unfortunately, in my view, unfortunately, the President eventually followed the lead too late, as it turned out, and the leaders of the House and Senate, Democrat and Republican, didn't follow it at all. And that's a sad thing, I think, for this country. But as a result, we settled this week for a bill that reins in discretionary spending, does little to tackle our long-term financial challenges. And in short, again, it was a deal, not a solution, and not a very good deal as far as I'm concerned. It only addresses the symptoms of our nation's fiscal ailments, specifically the debt ceiling, but failed to cure our serious disease of debt and deficits. And unfortunately, we largely put off till tomorrow, at least till later this year, maybe early next year, what we ought to have been doing right now. And as Senator Brown has heard me say probably more times than he wants to remember now, but I said a lot, and my staff certainly feels that way, but I'm going to keep saying it for as long as I'm around here. A lot of Americans believe that those of us here in Washington aren't capable of making or taking the difficult steps that are necessary to put our country back on the right fiscal track. And given what's happened in recent weeks, it's easy to see why they feel that way. They don't think we can do the hard work we're hired to do, that is to effectively manage the tax dollars that they entrust us with. They look at the spending and the tax decisions we've made in recent years and also at the poor management across government and question whether the culture here is broken. They question whether we're capable of making the kind of tough decisions that American families make with their own budgets. And I don't blame folks for being skeptical, and especially in light of the debate we've seen in recent months and the deal that we arrived at in recent days. Now more than ever, we need to establish a different kind of culture here in Washington when it comes to spending. We need to move from what I've described here many times as a culture of spendthrift to a culture of thrift. And this shift must involve looking in every nook and cranny of the federal government and asking this question about all kinds of programs, domestic programs, discretionary programs, entitlement programs. How do we get a better result for less money? Or how do we get a better result for the same amount of money? When it comes to property management, it's clear to me and others that we can get better results and we can save money. Federal property management has been on the Government Accountability Office's high-risk list since January of 2003. In part due to significant amounts of underutilized and excess property. This problem is coupled with the fact that federal agencies too often depend on costly leased space to meet new space requirements, although building ownership has proven to be more cost-effective over time. Not always, but oftentimes. The most recent comprehensive data available shows that federal agencies apparently possess more than 45,000 underutilized buildings, totaling more than 340 million square feet in space. These buildings cost nearly $1.7 billion annually to secure and to maintain. Fixing that problem doesn't balance the budget, but it's a great step in the right direction. But in addition, for the past 20 years, GAO has been telling us that we've been too reliant on leasing. Since 2008, GSA has leased more property than it owns. And in fiscal years 2011, the agency will spend over $5 billion to house federal employees in 184 million square feet of private office space. In addition, while GSA serves as the central leasing agent for the federal government and is responsible for managing and obtaining space for agencies, many agencies have obtained their own leasing authority and in doing so have chosen not to take advantage of GSA's expertise in federal real estate. Given that many of these agencies lack experience in performing lease procurements, they often bind the government into costly long-term lease obligations that result in millions of dollars in additional costs to the federal government, actually tens of millions, maybe even hundreds of millions of extra dollars in costs. For example, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission is, and we know this one all too well, but is an agency that has been granted independent leasing authority along with some other agencies. In July 2010, the Commission entered into a sole source lease for 900,000 square feet of space at a privately owned building called Constitution Center in Washington. That lease would have cost taxpayers some $556 million over 10 years. Although the SEC has held independent leasing authority for more than 20 years, the Commission's Inspector General has found that the agency still lacks adequate policies and procedures for managing its leasing actions. In fact, this was the second time within the past 5 years in which the SEC was involved in an unnecessarily expensive leasing arrangement. Unfortunately, this is not the only agency that operates this way. Similarly, in 2006, the FBI executed a 30-year operating lease to house employees in its Chicago field office that cost an estimated $40 million more than construction over a 30-year period. Fortunately, both Congress and the Obama administration are united in their commitment to address these issues. The President's latest budget included a recommendation to form a civilian property realignment board to review the government's property portfolio and dispose of those deemed excess in an expedited manner. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that Senator Brown may have actually introduced legislation to codify that proposal. This is a proposal that my colleagues and I on the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee had an opportunity to examine at our June 9th real property hearing. And while the proposal focuses primarily on assisting agencies in the disposal of excess and underutilized buildings, it does provide for opportunities to consolidate or co-locate operations which could ultimately help reduce the government's leasing portfolio. I have concerns about the cost and effectiveness of the President's approach, but I look forward to taking what works in his proposal in Senator Brown's legislation, along with other ideas, and introducing a bill in the fall that will help right-size the government's portfolio in a way that is advantageous for federal agencies, for community stakeholders, and the clientele served by those agencies. Clearly, the momentum is building to address a widely recognized problem, yet in all of our zeal to say we must be intelligent in our approach. Rome, I'm told, wasn't built in a day. The federal government's bloated property portfolio cannot be unbuilt in a day. We have an opportunity, though, to do this right and change the way the federal government manages its hundreds of billions of dollars worth of assets. That said, the agency shouldn't be waiting for civilian BRAC to solve their problems, or at least begin to solve their property management problems now. In an era of shrinking budgets and scarce resources, it's critical that agencies come up with innovative property management tools that will identify opportunities to right-size our real estate portfolios, reduce costs, and achieve savings by eliminating unneeded assets and expensive long-term space. Before I turn it over to Senator Brown, let me just say, every now and then, and I'm sure Scott's notices, we misalign incentives. We misalign incentives in the federal government. We incentivize the wrong kind of behavior, and then we get the wrong kind of results. And what we do within the federal government, we incentivize a lot of federal agencies to lease. The incentives are to lease. And with the way that we call, if you want to buy a building or something like that up front, even if that makes sense long term, we incentivize them with the way that we score that expenditure in the first year, as opposed to leasing, which could be scored for 10, 20, 30 years or even more. And one of the things I hope comes out of this hearing today are some good discussion on how we change those incentives, get them properly aligned so that we not only meet the space needs of our agencies, but we need to better meet the fiscal constraints of our country. So I look forward to this hearing from our witnesses, when we both do, is you share with us your thoughts on how to transform our asset portfolio in a way that generates significant and lasting savings to the public. And with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Senator Scott Brown of Massachusetts.